Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Nicki Cashpool from TBR, and I'm joined again by Dave Smith, my colleague at Info Analysis. I am especially pleased today to be welcoming a good friend and former leader of mine in my professional and personal life, Steve Mendelsohn. Steve and I go back a number of years. I think we're verging on a decade at this point. We can now use markers such as that. Um, and I asked Steve to join us today for a couple of reasons. Not only because personally, and as well professionally, I know that Steve is known for his focus on developing his people and being sought out as a mentor and someone who's pragmatic and approachable at the same time. But also someone who's just a lot of fun to speak with and who I keep in touch with, and I count as one of my closest friends. So, Steve, thank you for joining.
Well, thanks, Nikki. It's good to hear your voice, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Excellent. Well, I know in the last year you've yourself undergone quite a few changes, including founding and acting as the principal of a leadership organization that called Better Self Leadership, and with the intent, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the focus is on coaching leaders to be better leaders and how to galvanize teams together and be the best possible version of themselves. And while your organization was obviously formed pre-pandemic, what Dave and I would like to open with is, what are the most important things that you tell leaders to keep in mind, not only in general, but at a time like this? And how have things changed in your perception over the past couple of months?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it's interesting because so many of the things that are applicable in the time of a crisis or in the time of radical change like this are the same things that serve you in normal times. And the idea is to recognize that your function is to be a leader. And I mean, that sounds a little bit fatuous because that's what you're asking me. What does that mean? But I think that there's a few key elements of that. And one is to realize that you have a team that you're responsible for. All of these people are completely freaked out and unsure of their future, unsure of their safety. Everything that we all know is on everybody's mind. Interestingly, on everybody's mind on the whole planet right now is, what's the future look like? How do I get through this? I'm completely disoriented, all of that. And you, whether you've been a manager for 2 weeks or whether you're an executive who's been leading for decades, you've got to be the source of reassurance to them. And you may have to be the source of reassurance to them even while you're looking somewhere else for your reassurance. So I think that's the number one thing for stabilizing your team. And I think about it like if you're a parent and you have a 3-year-old who is scared because he or she has convinced themselves that, there's a monster in the closet. And so they're crying and they're freaking out, they're scared, they run into your room and they climb into bed next to their mother or father. And once they're there, they feel completely safe. They feel like the problem is over. And I don't think it's an analytical thing. They haven't thought it through. What's mom going to do when the monster, breathes fire on her or something like that? But they're reassured because they trust their parents, and their parents are exuding calm. The parents are not freaking out about the monster. They've got this. And not to infantilize the concerns of employees in a company, but I think there's a real parallel there, that even though you're going to freak out in private later, with your friends or trusted people, you've got to project some kind of calm and optimism, without being fake about it, in order to fulfill that role of providing some stability that your team is going to take on. So I think of that as the first thing. That's sort of is the table stakes that you have to do first.
And to me, that sort of leads into, I guess, a follow on. How then, do you build that sort of credibility and trust, during this
Mhm.
time?
I think building trust is a fundamental that um, underlies all of this stuff. Um, and trust has, there's a number of different aspects of trust. Trust that someone's going to be honest. Trust that someone's going to have good judgment. Trust that somebody says they'll follow through and do what they said they were going to do. And I think establishing that environment of trust is is fundamental to having a healthy team. So how do you do it? Part of it is by being honest, being overtly honest, being vulnerable, sharing something of yourself, listening when people are talking, and showing that you care. Uh, it's a matter of empathy. It's a matter of authenticity that people can see, and people can sense if you really have their backs. You can follow through on that to really earn that trust and to reassert it by doing just what I said a minute ago, which is if you commit to something, you do it. You kind of gain trust by giving trust is the other half of the equation. So that if you start with a default position of trusting your team, unless they give you a reason not to, that's going to go a long way. You've got to treat people like adults. You've got to treat people with respect. And if you do that and you're honest about yourself and you admit what you don't know, as well as being forthright about what you do know, you create that environment that puts you in a position to project that kind of security that we were talking about before.
Those
Steve,
are
how would you differentiate? Sorry, Dave, I'm just going to keep going.
no go for it, go for it.
When you, just to kind of follow up on what you just said, how would you differentiate between building trust in an individual and then as an individual as part of as a team, the team dynamic? I think now, quote unquote, more than ever, people are seeing that everyone's situation could be starkly different, that there are individual circumstances regarding family, children, people who may or may not be sick, and then other people who are dealing with other situations. So where does the guidance between the balance of individual coaching and then team coaching come into play? Or are we all just kind of still figuring that out? Because I haven't quite gotten there yet.
Well, I think both are at work here, individual coaching, dealing with people's unique situations. But I think we also find in a time like this that people have a sense of fairness, and people do care about others. In a time when all of this stuff is crashing down, you see surprising stories of people exhibiting acts of kindness. And so if I'm taking that acts of kindness idea, it means that if we have a team and one of the people has no child care because they have 3 kids that go to elementary school every day, and suddenly those kids are at home and are being schooled by this parent, in addition to their having their responsibilities, I think you find that people will be understanding if you adjust expectations during this crisis differently, and you treat different people differently because of their situation, not because it's favoritism, but it's pragmatism. And it is a sense of fairness that I think if you're open about that and why, you have a chance of still having a cohesive team. doesn't mean somebody gets a free ride. And I don't think anyone views it as a free ride because they understand the exigencies that different people are dealing with. And as long as everyone's putting forth their effort, I don't think that gets in the way of the cohesion of the team.
That was very diplomatic of you, Steve, but it does make a whole lot of sense. Sometimes I struggle with in practice versus in theory, and then how the competing modalities come to bear.
And I'm talking about theory. I'm talking about what I'm seeing in situations where I have, people dealing with realities. And yeah, it's not as neat and tidy as the theory. But I think if you start from an expectation that people are going to rise, it's the only chance that they will. If you start without that expectation, there's no chance that you'll achieve that.
I mean, I think a month ago we were all lighting each other on fire over toilet paper, and now we've emerged from that mini crisis. So we're definitely, not to kind of downplay it at all, but people are continuously, seemingly so, adapting and changing to figure out how to operate in this. What I think you said I might have semi-coined the new abnormal that we're living in today. And
and I think you talk about the toilet paper thing, and I don't want to go to all the obvious, wordplay that comes along with that, but some people are, let's just say, jerks. And I think I'll use a easier example. You have people who are moving from New York to their house out in the Hamptons, and there are other people that live in the Hamptons all year long, and they do regular, laboring work. And then this rich person comes out to the Hamptons and goes to the best grocery store there and buys all the carrots. I don't know if you've read about this, but he bought all the carrots and left the store with a cart full of all the carrots because he loves carrots and didn't want to deal with a shortage. When you hear a story like that, obviously, I will use the term, the guy's an asshole. And at the same time, I think that brings the people who are not in that category together and are ready to trust, because that guy isn't in every work team in your company. And so I think that inspires people to behave the opposite. I know that sounds a little bit, I'm not even going to say naive, because that would imply that I don't believe it. That may sound very optimistic, but I do think that you see the best in people in times like this, with the toilet paper and carrot outliers.
We've all
like Black Friday shopping on steroids right now.
Personal lives. That's what I'm going to call them from now on.
Steelers.
No, it's like Black Friday shopping on steroids right now, right? But it's funny. It's funny because
But Black Friday happens in the best of times, when people are happiest and most exuberant.
When they have money and jobs, and
this is true. Although I've seen some scary people on Black Friday.
Exactly.
So with what you're saying too, I'm wondering, it's so, especially in this time, like with the pandemic, there are external forces, right, sort of causing and initiating change, right? And we've talked about cultural change and change management. How do you sort of navigate through this change, where it's like it's coming upon you, right? And you sort of have to not only take leadership of it, but also you sort of flow with it and almost like shift policies, right, during it.
It is a real leadership challenge, because it's happening so quickly. It's happening in such a disorienting way. And, it's different than previous crises we've gone through, because in every other crisis, the instruction has always been, go and visit with the elderly, take care of your grandma, do all of this stuff. And now grandma is dying alone, and the best you can do is put your hand up to the window. And I know that's a little grisly, but that is a huge difference, is that we are suddenly blown apart. We're aerosolized or particleized or whatever it is, so that we don't get to we don't get to hug each other. And I think that's one of the most disorienting things, about this. And so when you suddenly have all this change, and maybe you've always been opposed to work from home arrangements, and now you're forced into one, or maybe weren't opposed to it, but now you're forced into it, and everyone is into it, is forced into it. And so it really puts a burden on you as a leader to keep your team together. And I think that, there's a few things that are essential to do in that circumstance. And I think one of them, we started touching on this earlier, is to communicate fully and honestly and positively as you can. Tell people what you know, acknowledge what you don't know, validate their feelings, and be honest, but find the positive in the story. There's different ways to be honest. You can tell people, I don't know what's going to happen any better than you do. Some of you are going to be dead before this is over, and who knows what the world's going to look like afterwards. I hear people talking about a depression. I don't blame you for being scared. Well, that would be one way of delivering a message. Or you could say, I understand this is scary. We're going to go through some hard times. I see it as a chance to show what we can do to our customers and to our management and to ourselves. And so nobody knows exactly what the future is going to look like. But if we strengthen our trust with our customers by treating them right and responding to what they need through this, then we'll have a chance to be the leaders in the recovery. Really, the same fact base in both of those. And one of those is distressing and more depressing. And the other one maybe gives people a sense that, well, we may have a mission to do. So I think that kind of communication is one of the things to do. I think another one is, to balance all of this support and empathy and understanding with demands for meaningful work. I think you've still got to hold people accountable. I think you've got to be very clear what people are committing to and what you need them to commit to. And like we said before, it doesn't have to be equal for everyone who's got a different circumstance. But I think you've got to be crystal clear about that. And you've got to hold people accountable for it. It's best if you can do that and give them some autonomy so that they can be making decisions on their own, because you're not in a place where you can look over their shoulder every day. You're not even in a place where you can pat them on the back and put your hand on their shoulder every day while they're working through this. But if you do that and make the work itself a constant, so that people are still accountable, first of all, you need them to do that in order for you to be productive for your employer, but it also imbues their work with a sense of meaning. And I think one of the things you've got to do to keep a team going is to make the work kind of an island of stability in a world that's all upside down. So that people have this, they know what's expected of them, they know when they've done it, when they've not done it, and it's something to focus on to keep them from agonizing, over whether the guy that, exhaled near them just killed them.
Or
which
who
is in the
stole your
back of every.
carrots.
That's right. That's right.
I mean,
All right, you're telling me I'm getting too dark. I get it.
No,
But I
you need
really
to scale it back. Your darkness is what makes it the most relatable.
But I think all of this comes down to what I think is the most important thing you can do as a leader in all of this, and that is to articulate a purpose, to help people feel a sense of meaning and a sense of work in their job. And they don't have to be out there, coming up with the vaccine, but they have to have a purpose that's meaningful beyond themselves. I think it's easiest if you make that about customers, whether they're your external customers or internal customers, depending on what the type of team it is. But if you can activate their sense of pride, and create this as a time that they're going to look back on with pride of what they did. I think that's an important thing. I think about a story that we had during Hurricane Sandy. And Hurricane Sandy was, if you weren't in the Northeast or the New York area even, it's probably not a big memory, but it was a huge deal for us in New York. And people for many days without power, without lights, I guess that's the same thing, without phones, without cell phones, the whole place was crumbling. We had an emergency response plan where the first thing we would do was find every employee and make sure they're safe. And the way we did it was send out emails, we sent automated calls to their cell phones and automated calls to their landlines. Well, a lot of people were inaccessible by all of those things. We would have a daily conference call, and people would be fading in and fading out because day by day, their cell phone batteries were getting weaker and there was no way to recharge them. But we would have these conference calls where we each reported on, what percent of our team had been found and identified. I'd say, well, we have 68% of our people done, and someone else would write, well, we've got 74%. We're in first place. And as I'm thinking about it, that means 26% of your people are missing. That's a bad number. And
Steve,
little by little,
I was one of the 26%.
Why does that not surprise me?
In the grocery store, I remember this now. Not to derail, but that hit. Sorry about any undue worry.
Yeah, appreciate it now. And eventually everyone did show up. But maybe that's even a digression on the story I'm trying to get to. But we also discovered in those first couple of days that we had a couple of critical path data servers. We had a product that was a research product with 100,000 subscribers getting their information about tax and accounting. And not all of them were in New York, and they still needed this information. They were still at work. And, our commitment was we weren't going to have any downtime, and that our, content updates would continue to go on every day. Well, we discovered to our dismay that there were a couple of critical path servers that were in a building that was dead, that, had no power. And so a couple of the guys on the team, understanding our commitments and understanding how important it was for our business, they went on a mission to this darkened building on Lower Broadway where the whole of Manhattan was black and dead. And they talked their way past the security guard there, and with their flashlights went up this darkened staircase, retrieved these servers, and brought them back down, and heroically took them uptown to Times Square, where we had a building that was lighted, and reinstalled them there. And the whole point in the whole thing is, if you talk to this guy Perry now about how he remembers Hurricane Sandy, he's not going to tell you about the tree that fell down and went through the roof of his sun deck or whatever it is, or the fact that his basement was flooded for a month. He's going to tell you the story that he's proud of because he had a mission, he felt a purpose, he responded to it, and did something bigger than himself. And so I think that it's partly on the leader to create the environment that says, here's what we're going to do. And again, it doesn't have to be we're solving the whole crisis, but it can be the opportunity to say, we helped customers that were in a crisis. We made someone else's life easier. We fulfilled a commitment. And I think having that sense of purpose, being able to look back with pride on what you've done and sensing that while you're doing it is a big part of giving yourself the chance to succeed in motivating a team through this. It's not always going to work, but it is something that I think really puts you in a position to have that kind of success.
And Steve, you kind of harken back to those examples, which are very clearly etched in many of our memories. I was in that same regional. Clearly, I just told you about my embarrassing cell phone loss.
Yep.
The whole wonderful nature of the story trite. But we're still talking about something 8 years from the past, and now we're right in the midst of. We're not in the eye of the storm. We're still in the storm. I don't even know if there is going to be an eye. What Dave and I would love to do, because we're trying to kind of cultivate I guess for lack of a better word, a community of people from our own personal contacts. This is kind of our initial discussion, but would you be open to maybe doing like a relay or a look back in a couple of months with us to see if some examples like you speak to about Sandy, what we could possibly speak to them even in a month or two, because it seems like time is speeding up so quickly, and that a week means like 3 months in like our former lives.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And I mean, you see this, every commercial is showing pictures of heroes and stuff like that. But I'm saying yes to you, but I want to come back to this sense of purpose, because this is the one thing I see that I cannot see with a dry eye. And that is when you see these nurses with their faces scarred from the masks they're wearing, and an interviewer says to them, well, you don't have the right safety material. You're wearing a garbage bag. You're wearing a bandana. You're wearing a mask that is made for a hockey goalie instead of a nurse, or whatever you're doing. Why do you keep coming back? And they always say the same thing, which is, well, I will get choked up here. They say,
no, this is good for ratings, Steve.
If we don't take care of them, who will? Now, that's a sense of purpose beyond what I think you can get from your company's IT department, but maybe not. There's a sense that there's something important to be done here, and we have to do it. This is what we can look at. All these nurses and doctors that are coming out of retirement, then no one's going to blame them if they don't do that. If they say, well, yeah, I'm a nurse. This is what I do. I'm not going to respond now. When would I be responding? And it is so inspiring. And there's so many stories. That's why I have the optimism, that I choose the nurse over the carrot stealer. Because I think there's more of them, and I think they're making a bigger impact.
Well, I think there are a lot of invisible nurses that we all don't thank or don't even realize.
Yes.
We walk by as we focus our attention on the carrot stealer. So
right, and they're not doing it for the applause either. Even though they get it every night at 7:00, but I don't think that's where the motivation's coming from.
Yeah, this has been great.
For anyone not, I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
I was saying this is great. And thanks, Steve, for coming. So I think I want to focus, on what you were saying these last few minutes, really on that singleness of purpose, right? Sharing purpose, sharing a singleness of values and goals is going to be key for leadership and sort of getting through this time, and also coaching people through this time as well. So thanks a lot for this discussion. It's been great.
We talked before about, how do you lead people when you yourself are scared? And I think that the anxiety and so on is so universal, and I just think that as a leader, you've got to find a place to share that. You can't bottle it up. I read something this morning about PTSD and how it shows up decades later, and I don't know how we solve that, but I think you do need, if you're in a funk, you have to find a peer or a friend or a funk buddy to get through that. But I think that with all that, I think even for the leader, the sense of purpose can overlap with providing the leadership to your team, stabilizing this team. If you've got 5 people, 10 people, whatever it is, if you identify that as your purpose, what you're put here to do during this crisis, I think that helps you as the leader to keep motivated. For the manager who's trying to lead a team while being him or herself scared and disoriented, I think that the same approach makes sense, which is that sense of purpose. And if you're motivated by the sense of purpose to do something beyond yourself, then think of your team as the object of that. So that if you can be there for your team, if you can provide the stability for your team, the direction, the motivation, the productivity, all of that stuff, and grab onto that as your purpose as the leader, I think that gives you a better chance to be able to pull through and to be able to present that kind of stabilizing presence that we talked about in the beginning with the monster in the closet. That's my big finish.
Drum roll, please.
On the flip side, I also have to wonder if some degree of, to a certain extent, do leaders sometimes look to their team, and not to kind of take the analogy too far, but maybe sometimes there is something to be said about what look like undue fears, and that even if you have to put a brave face together to kind of keep those observations of your team in your back pocket and navigate around them without any alerts, but understanding that their concerns are still valid, and not to kind of circle back into probably a whole nother conversation, but I kind of almost see it as like a chicken and the egg leadership and team sort of symbiotic relationship, for lack of a better top of mind term.
I think that is completely true. I think that you have your role as the leader, but you are all going through this same experience. You're really all experiencing this in very much the same way.
So can I lead or end on a? You asked if I was going to put you in the spotlight at all, and I promise this is not a scary question, but Dave and I are purposing this whole kind of mini series of interviews and our interaction together on the preface of there has to be some good that comes out of all of this pain and uncertainty, and Mad Libs yourself to death with whatever adjective you want to. I mean, I tried. Literally had to do a thesaurus on unprecedented when writing an article earlier today. So, what would be your most funny moment and/or your most uplifting moment that you personally or professionally have experienced in the midst of all of this over the last month and a half, let's say, and just a kind of a quick blip back in time of something that makes you smile with that immediate question?
Well, I'll give you just my immediate reaction. We are living now. We've brought in my daughter, my son-in-law, and their 1-year-old baby. And while that doesn't sound on the face of it very stabilizing, and it hasn't been, and it's chaotic, and this is going to be even cornier than anything else I've said today, but seeing this little guy who, by the way, has learned to walk during the pandemic here in our house, it just helps you realize that that this will end, and that this is something we go through. You hear stories about how the world got better after the last pandemic and all of that kind of stuff. But it just I never thought that I really needed a 1-year-old living in my house again. But maybe I do. And
can I borrow him?
Yeah, you got to go through a 2-week quarantine before you get anywhere close to any of us.
Okay.
But it is, it's just kind of uplifting. It just, I mean, I always roll my eyes when someone say, "Oh, that gives me the perspective of what's important." But I think I'm going to stop rolling my eyes about that.
Well, that is a uplifting and also very, again, I struggle for the right words. So I don't know if this is an ongoing theme. I might have to get checked out myself, but that's a very fitting note to end on. And Steve, thank you so much for spending the time with Dave and I think injecting the human element into the discussions around business and technology is what he and I have, as analysts, personally need. But I think what the community at large, whether they're in technology or business or none of the above, it's also accessible. And having a business leader like yourself be able to shine some of that light on your personal and professional experiences and your insight, it's really special. So thank you for joining us, and I'll be in touch.
All right, great. I count on it. Thank you both. This has been a very fun event. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Take care, both of you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.